Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Policy Round series webinar. I'll give it a bit to let others join, and then we'll begin shortly. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Policy Round series webinar with Dr. Paula Gardner, Professor of Communication Studies and Media Arts at McMaster University. So the Policy Round series was created to share knowledge and insights on aging and technology research, as well as discuss the implications of the ongoing research. Our aim is to connect with policy stakeholders, partners, older adults, and caregivers. The series lasts 30 minutes. The presentation is a 15-minute presentation from our speaker, followed by a 10-minute Q&A. So the speaker will tell us about their research, what their findings are to date, and what the policy implications of the research are. So I will hand it over to Dr. Gardner. You can go ahead.
Hi, and thank you for having me. Shall I share my screen now?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Okay, I'm joining you today from McMaster University. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you, Norma, and the staff for having me today. I am a professor of communication studies and media arts here at McMaster, and I'm the Asper Chair in Communication. So thank you to the Asper Foundation for supporting my research. I guess the first thing I always note is in the aging community, I think we're more accustomed to seeing professors from health science and engineering and computer science and business. And sometimes it's unusual to see someone from communication and media arts. And the reason is because I do community-based research, particularly with people who tend to not get represented in research, marginalized communities. And we use art and technology to solve problems and create tools that communities need. And so my communication background and media arts background is very helpful in that work. I'm going to talk today about these two research projects. The first I am a co-applicant on. It's called MAC-M3. And the second I'm the PI, it's ABLE, and the most recent iteration with funding from a SSHRC Partnership Development Grant is ABLE Village. I'll talk a bit about both of these. These are both collaborations that involve interdisciplinary team members across Canada, and community organizations play key roles as co-researchers. And here are my little clusters of researchers and community groups, and thanks to the funders on the bottom, including SSHRC and the McMaster Institute for Research on Aging and LaBarge funding. So the first thing I want to talk about is the thematic for today. And one of the things that I've been working on closely for the past 15 years, including with researchers on these projects, is how to increase the diversity of data that we have in aging studies. And I think it's well documented that our research in health, wellness, tech design with aging populations tends to come from a pretty homogeneous population. And that would be a white population, very often a non-immigrant or recent immigrant population, often women, and often middle class or upper middle class. And I think there are lots of reasons for this. These folks tend to be well integrated into medical services, and that's often how we recruit. But there are many reasons why it's difficult to access diverse participants. And one of the main statements I will be making and remaking today, it's that it's absolutely crucial that we diversify our data sets so that our health outcomes reflect diverse populations and the diverse challenges they face, the diverse environments that they live in. And our technology is designed to meet the needs of diverse populations in diverse regions with diverse language and cultural and mobility and ability backgrounds. And there's a reason why there's not a lot of diversity in our populations. And one is because we're accustomed to recruiting in medical and health organizations that do not generally have diverse participants or diverse patients. But the other reason is because, again, I don't think this will come as a surprise to anybody on this webinar, but there's a long history in North America and, well, around the world where research has been extractive, and I'll talk about what that means in a minute, exploitative, harmful, or at the very least, unwelcoming and inhospitable. Participants who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, gender, or sex diverse might find micro biases occurring that make them feel very uncomfortable. Our research tends to have practices that reflect kind of histories of white and settler colonial approaches where we develop research questions on our own and test them and treat participants as subjects in our research and not sort of seeking to have shared research interests or aims, or to investigate questions that are of interest to community instead of just to ourselves. And then our research practices often are themselves inhospitable and don't help to address power imbalances and subconscious bias that can make research very uncomfortable for people who are, again, people of color, Black, Indigenous, gender and sex minorities. So I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by some of these terms, and then I'm going to show you how we tried to create a hospitable approach to research and recruit diverse participants. So I think 4 key ways that I think about engaging principles that create opportunities for diverse recruitment and to keep people in your study are using these principles: non-extractive, anti-colonial, age-friendly or critical disability friendly, and interdisciplinary. And I'll talk more about that as I go forward. So first, what is extraction? We hear this a lot coming from feminist and anti-colonial researchers and Indigenous researchers. And I think this picture is a really great example, taking a force, pulling from a community, leaving a big hole, not creating research that is sustainable and not respectful of the ecosystem or the needs of community. Where can you find this information in theory? Well, it comes from many different places, but especially feminist, post-colonial and anti-colonial areas, Indigenous feminist approaches, and critical aging and critical disability approaches, which really have a lot in common. And here I want to reference the work of Dr. Kim Tallbear, who is a research chair at the University of Alberta, and she writes about research and extraction. And extraction is described by Kim Tallbear as exploiting participants, speaking on behalf of participants, providing some kind of benefit, and then leaving. The research ends and nothing remains for the community. So they've gotten accustomed to the benefit and it disappears. Reinforces existing equalities, and that happens a lot in researcher when researchers understand themselves as the expert in the study, and devaluing community knowledge or local knowledge. And so what on the flip side, what is collaborative research? And collaborative research, according to, again, Dr. Kim Tallbear, we think about not just creating knowledge ourselves by studying subjects, but rather co-constituting knowledge. turning the lens back on ourselves and trying to assess how we're operating in the research environment instead of studying the participants who've arrived for your study. Sharing conceptual ground, thinking about what issues are of concern to both parties, the academic and community partners, and how can you create shared interests and goals, and think together about risks and benefits that the community needs. So how do we do this? So because a lot of participants recognize that research can be exploitative and extractive, really it's important to engage anti-oppressive approaches when we're thinking about recruitment. And I'm going to talk about a case study here in just a minute that, from a project at McMaster. So key techniques, our outreach has to look different. And one thing that I am very much in favor of is discussing the need for diverse data and the history of research practices that haven't created diverse data from diverse aging populations. Let the community in on that. The Tri-Council tells us that participating in research is actually a right. There's a right to be represented. So sharing that ethic with communities, I think, can go a long way toward helping to secure interest, but also trust from communities. Build relationships, create a safe place for research, remunerate participants either through a gift card or through cash, and also ask what they're trying to achieve from the research. What maybe they want to learn about outcomes, but maybe they want to learn how to use a piece of technology. And then share results. And again, try to ensure that the research or whatever benefits were accrued can continue once you leave the research project. Again, address the lack of diversity, address the value of diversity, and create a safe research environment that reflects a history of a lack of diversity. So on to Monitor My Mobility. So Monitor My Mobility is a research project at McMaster. I'm a co-applicant. It's run by Dr. Marla Beauchamp in health sciences. And what we're trying to do is use existing activity trackers to track older adults' mobility. Currently, we asked them to wear this watch, which is called a tick watch. It's on the market. We didn't create it, for 10 days. And we captured distance, regularity of movement, pace, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're trying to do is have quite a large study with 1,500 participants and try to understand how participants age in everyday life and how their mobility changes, because we know that mobility is a predictor of wellness and health. And we're hoping to understand, what are major predictors of mobility, enhanced mobility or decreased mobility, but also, is there a tool we can create that will help adults themselves to track their mobility so that they can make changes as their mobility begins to decline in early days and repair that so that they can maintain mobility? And again, I think I'm speaking to an audience that knows this, but mobility is a predictor of physical wellness, mental wellness, cognitive wellness, and socialization, which in turn helps us to be well in all of those ways. So mobility is really crucial. And so what we did was we began recruiting in kind of standard ways using flyers, social media, posting flyers at health and medical institutions around Hamilton, and we ended up getting a lot of participants who fall into that category that I discussed earlier. They were white, upper middle class, and mostly female. And this was not going to be an accurate reflection of what Hamilton looks like, or what Ontario looks like, or what Canada looks like. They also tended to be urban people and not rural people. And we all know that there's great diversity in mobility depending on different kinds of identifiers and other kinds of variables, such as whether you live in an urban or rural environment. So we needed to increase our diversity. And at the same time, the McMaster Institute for Research on Aging realized that a lot of us researchers were having a similar problem with recruiting. We were getting really homogeneous populations. So they started actually a very strong relationship with Dixon Hall, which is a community center in downtown, well, you can see here, downtown East Toronto. It began, I think, 150 years ago as a soup kitchen, and now provides a lot of services to community, not just to an older adult population, but to immigrant populations, youth populations, unhoused populations. And they have a lot of exercise and recreation programs. And so what we did was, we talked to them about how to recruit. And of course, there's an opportunity to show up at exercise classes and let folks know what your project is and asked if they want to participate. But we decided to go one step further. And this was based on research that the group of us were familiar with. And so number one, we decided that we needed to embed a researcher in Dixon Hall so that there was someone familiar to the community. There wasn't an outsider like me showing up at a yoga class and passing out a flyer and asking people for this pretty significant commitment to wear a tracker for 10 days. And then again, do it again in 4 months. And so we embedded this person that she attended classes and participated. She became very friendly with the staff, which was intentional. And so the staff recommended our project to particular people at the center. And these were the regulars in the groups, right? So like the opinion leaders of Dixon Hall. And so we became known to them. A lot of the folks who were in these classes who were interested were Mandarin speakers. And so we were lucky enough to be able to hire a research assistant who spoke Mandarin. And again, that eased conversations and on-site recruitment. We provided perks, so gift cards, but also just snacks and candy. And so this actually was highly successful, building trust, embedding in community, having envoys. And then finally, the last piece was those participants who took part in our study recommended our study to others. And a lot of the people they recommended came and volunteered for the study. So it was very successful. And this is a poster we just presented at Age Well that's listing our results. But you can see this first column here, MIP Hamilton, which 820 participants, you'll see that there's a much lower rate of immigrants. Non-white population is 4.4%. So you can see I'm making my point around the lack of diversity in that early part of our research study. Here at Dixon Hall, you can see the numbers go up. So 45% born outside of Canada, 30% non-white, a significantly greater representation of people with lower income, and who live alone. So we're getting different kinds of diversity. Then we're getting class diversity, origin diversity, race diversity. I've got not too many minutes. Let me just discuss very quickly another project I'm working on and then give you some takeaways. So second project is ABLE. We're building an online interactive website for gaming and art creation. And in our new project, we're turning this into a village that has lots of spaces, including an arcade and a park. And it's a very accessible interface. It's 2D the way it looks. And you can enter and play these co-located games. So you can paint together, draw together. And within our area, there's an embedded teleconference system. So you can talk to your loved one or your friend right through the system. You don't have to turn on Zoom and work with two platforms. And so we also, same thing, we were looking to do online research with older adults in this area and now across Canada. And we're using those same kinds of principles that our flyers and recruitment are reflecting the lack of diversity in participants, the need for it. We are using community partners as our envoys. So again, this is the safe medium between us and community members, where they might go to the YWCA, they might go here in Toronto to Thrive Community, or here in Hamilton to Thrive. In Toronto, they might go to Dixon Hall, and there's someone there that they know, that they trust, who is a staff person, who can talk them through the research project and not convince or coerce them, but help them to become fully consented and understanding about the research project, and to help when they have issues with the research project. There are a number of other kinds of principles we use. We try to do really well-informed meetings. Folks know what's going to happen at the beginning, middle, and end. They're going to know that it will go slow, there will be breaks, lots of things that are appealing to folks who might have different kinds of disabilities and need that kind of break. So this is the last slide, policy recommendations. So the Tri-Council has lots of great training modules, including the research ethics modules that train us. And there's great modules on doing work with Indigenous communities. And I think there's room for more modules on using these age-friendly and anti-oppressive approaches for recruitment, particularly the part about being transparent about the need for engagement, and that research is a right, and that the outcomes we produce from our research are not going to reflect a diverse population if we're not investigating with a diverse population. And again, repeating clear and transparent recruitment, safe research process, consenting that is continuous. Our consent isn't just at the beginning, it goes throughout the process. So we reconsent people throughout their participation, and they can leave whenever they want with no questions asked. Embedding researchers in community, engaging community groups as envoys, so there's a safe place for participants to go when they have questions. Remunerate, make sure there are benefits, that you're not extracting, but you're leaving behind benefits for the community. Develop shared outcomes, use co-creation and participatory methods, where knowledge on both sides is appreciated and respected. And again, reference these resources: Indigenous, feminist, post-colonial, and critical aging resources. So again, thanks to all my partners and funders. And here, I'll leave this up for a minute. So my email is here. My lab is Pulse Lab, and both of these projects can be accessed from the Pulse Lab McMaster website. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner. Very interesting research that you're carrying out indeed, and very important lessons for inclusion and diversity for sure. So to everyone who's listening, you can go ahead and add your questions in the Q&A. There's already one. You can go ahead and answer it if you see it, Dr. Gardner.
I'm seeing links to the Age Well report and the newsletter.
They just beside the chat, there's a Q&A. Can you see that?
Oh yeah, sorry.
It's all right.
Okay, hi, Jenna. Thanks for the presentation. Do you have example strategies that you have used for the continued engagement for follow-up on research results you mentioned participants often would like? That's a great question. So strategies for continued engagement. Well, I have a strategy we just are putting in place with my new project. So in addition to having the community group staff serve as envoys, we are choosing from participant groups a peer leader. And that peer leader is the envoy between the participants and the staff and the academic staff. And the idea there is that, again, it might be an even safer space if one of the community participants is considered a lead. And we're hoping that that helps to reduce recidivism or people departing because they've got that kind of enthusiasm and that leadership role. We continue to remunerate and give benefits, but one of the things I think that's worked best, and this is with all populations I've worked with, including youth, is to ask them what they're hoping to get from the research. And very often they, you know, at first they might not tell you. They might just say, oh, it's just great to be here and I'd like to hear the results. But sometimes they want something, like they want training in, you know, building a website or Photoshop or interviewing or podcasting or audio recording on their phone. And so if we can give them a little bit of training, I think the relationship becomes deeper and more respected. But I'd love to hear if other people have techniques that they use, because we're all learning here, right?
That's true. If anyone has any feedback, they can throw it into the chat.
Thanks.
And Jenna says that's fantastic. From me, my question is, I've seen that sometimes it's difficult to get participants to be in studies, and I think that's why in the end it is the usual, you know, the research participant becomes a homogeneous group. So I like the approach that you are using with the Hamilton group. But what has shown the most promise in the Mark M3 study for inclusivity?
I think that the Dixon Hall project, I mean, this is all very new. We've been doing this the past year, but I think you know, the most expensive technique we used, which was taking a postdoctoral fellow and embedding her in Dixon Hall for 2 full days a week to create community and trust. I think that has absolutely been the most effective because she's a friend of theirs now, right? And so, you know, there's a different level of trust that comes when community participants see us showing up in their spaces and spending time building community with them. And, you know, I know what you're all thinking. You know, it's hard enough to go through the steps we already have to go through to get research ethics or approval, create the flyers, send them out, consent people, get the research done on time. And how do we make time for this slower form of research and relationship building? And, you know, this is something, I guess it's another policy recommendation, but, you know, I'm often heard saying in my university that this labor that is involved in participatory anti-oppressive approach needs to be recognized and rewarded. And by rewards, I mean that your university sees it as part of your research labor, and that it shouldn't be seen as a deficit that your research took an extra year, or that you know, maybe you have one fewer publication because you're spending time building community and trusted relationships to get a greater diversity in your participant group. And so I think that university administrators need to spend some time thinking about how to balance the scales for those of us who are doing rigorous community participation, because it does take longer. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I add those budget lines in my grant applications, and I'm very transparent about it, right? We need extra money to situate researchers in residence. We need money. We remunerate our partner organizations as well. We don't ask them to just volunteer, right? So we put in funding lines for that as well. So I think that there are some structural things we can do, like pressing the grant agencies to sort of respect that we need to remunerate participants, and asking the university to kind of respect the extra time and labor that comes with participatory work.
That's true. So you mentioned in one of your policy directions, or the implications of your study, shared outcomes. What are some of the, what is one takeaway you want us to have for the shared outcomes?
Sure, that's a great question. So if you're engaging in participatory or co-design, ideally, you're not just bringing a fully formed research idea to participants, but you're presenting it to them as something we could do together. And it might need to shift if the community doesn't see the problem as their problem. And, you know, again, you're probably all thinking, well, how do you do that? Because you have to write a grant application that has a plan, and very often you have to follow the plan. So you can go early to community groups and workshop ideas with them. If you know, as long as you're not capturing data, in which case you would need research ethics approval. But if you're bouncing ideas around, a lot of times you can do that. And one of the things I do is, I guess, disruptive design. I bring an idea to the table just to start the conversation. So with Able Village, for example, we bring it to our participants and we say, okay, so here's our idea, is that, you know, this is a place for learning and thriving and socializing for people who are engaging remotely online. And, you know, we workshop some of the games with them, and you know, some of them like some of the games better than others. And so if they aren't liking one of the games, like the crossword puzzle, then we don't prioritize it as an outcome. We prioritize what they're looking for. And this kind of conversation and engagement produces the best kind of ideas, of course, because it's informed by the community. The community's asked us to create games that are more reflective of different cultural gaming practices, that can function with different languages, that can use captioning so that people that are coming with different languages can engage in the gameplay. And so those are examples of shared outcomes, that they're shaping the initial idea, but they're also shaping what we're designing in the process that ultimately shapes the outcomes.
I understand completely. It feels like they will be more involved as well, because it is something they have given ideas to. So that's important.
Yeah, and to the question earlier from Jenna, that helps to maintain commitment from your participants, because they really feel like researchers and not like paid subjects.
Yeah, like, and it doesn't feel extractive, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Gardner. We have come to the end of our policy round webinar today. For anyone who wants to reach out, please feel free to reach out to Dr. Gardner if you have any more questions. Thank you so much for your attendance today. Thank you so much, Dr.
Well,
Gardner.
thanks to the attendees, and thank you, Norma.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.